Okay, so some stuff that I want to go over with you, I'm gonna then erase this and go over some other stuff with you as well, because, we haven't been here working together on this material. So, we're talking about atomic theory is what we're talking about in lesson 1. And so, first we need to understand who all was involved with atomic theory, and your book just goes through some of the most known and the most talked about. There were actually a lot more contributors to atomic theory, but the ones that you need to know for me are the ones in the book. I won't be doing any additional ones this year. Okay, so it all started with a Greek philosopher, Democritus, and he proposed that everything was made out of little tiny particles, that if you mixed them in different ratios, they created different materials. So there were these little atoms, undividable atoms, atomos is the Greek word, that if we had these atomos and we put them together in certain ratios, we would create something. So maybe that's H2O. Okay, so he was on to something, but what's really crazy is this is just off the top of his head. There was no technology or anything like that. There was just things. There was like clay pots, there was wood, there were metal tools, and yet he thought, no, I think things are made up of little tiny particles that you just mix them in different ratios. So it's pretty incredible that he had this idea. The problem was that idea was really too hard for most people to grasp. So Aristotle was also a Greek philosopher at that time, and his idea was actually the popular idea because people could understand it. He said, no, everything's made out of earth, water, air, and fire. Just those 4 ingredients. If you have those 4 ingredients, you make everything and anything. Well, that kind of makes sense. In order to make plants, you got to have the ground, the soil. You got to have water, the rain. He didn't put energy, he put fire, but we now know that you need the energy of the sun for photosynthesis, etc., etc. But his idea wasn't horrible. It made sense at the time. You could make anything if you had materials from the earth and you put fire, then you could make clay into bowls and bricks, and so it made sense, and it actually became the popular idea until John Dalton came along, and he was like, I think there's something to this thing that Democritus was talking about. And John Dalton was during a time that you could actually start doing science experiments, so he started doing experiments, and he supported the idea of the atom, the small tiny particle that could not be divided. Okay. Then you had Thomson, who then found that no, there's other particles in there. There's got to be something negative going on in there. So he discovered the electron. Thomson discovered the electron. And his model was referred to as the plum pudding. But nowadays, since most people and most kids can't understand plum pudding because they've never eaten it, they kind of call it the chocolate chip cookie look, because it has the atom, and then throughout it are negatively charged electrons, was his model, was Thomson's model. Then Rutherford discovered that there must be something that's massive in the middle. There must be a mass in the middle, something bigger. So he discovered the nucleus. The other thing about Thomson, he discovered that the cathode ray had a negative charge by how it was behaving within the cathode ray. You know how like charges will repel and then opposite charges will attract. So he discovered that the cathode ray was a negative charge. Then we go on and we have Niels Bohr. Niels Bohr is probably the most common used science symbol that you'll see. Here, I'll come to the other side. Bohr's model, he thought, you know what, there is a nucleus. I'm agreeing with Rutherford, there is a nucleus. So there's a positive, massive nucleus. And then around that nucleus would be the electrons whirling in a path, because if they weren't in a path, his thinking was if they're not in a certain path, then they would collide and that would be a problem. Or they'd get too close to each other and negative would repel and the atom would fall apart and matter would fall apart, it wouldn't hold together. So Niels Bohr came up with the Bohr model that is the electrons orbiting around the nucleus, which had a positive charge.